Thanks, Celine. And yeah, I develop apps now, I suppose, too, and we'll get into the business of why and how I got into this, and I think it's relevant for the conversation that we're having in the South as well as across the country. But before I get into that, let me just give you a quick overview. So I will present two products. One is the Community Biomass Handbook, the ebook, and the second is an embedded computer application called the Wood Energy Financial App. And so I'll present both of those, starting first with the handbook and then giving a demonstration of the ebook. I'm going to stop multiple times for questions. In your chat window, please begin queuing up questions. Any question is relevant, and we'll try to get to those and stop from time to time to talk about those. And then after, we're going to leave time for Gregg Mast to present as well about the future build-out and where this project is going, where this tool is going, and more broadly, how we're engaging users of the tool as well as broader users on the conversation of wood energy, in particular thermal wood energy. We'll talk a little bit about electricity perhaps today, but primarily we'll be talking about thermal wood heating and using examples from the southern U.S. I'm going to jump to this slide here, the handbook. Let's just jump right into the handbook. Quickly, the authors, myself, Amy Lowell with the Pacific Northwest Research Station, Dan Ben, private consultant engineer out of Colorado, Roy Anderson with the Beck Group, private consulting company out of Portland, Oregon, and Steve Taff, an economist here at the University of Minnesota. So collectively, this team, and we've worked with a lot of other people as well on this over the last several months, and so it's really quite a breadth of people who are now using these tools and who are having input on the future build-out and development of these tools. So now, why the southern U.S. or why are we having a conversation here? You know, I've been working all across the United States, primarily in the western half and in the Lake States, as well as in Scandinavia, around the conversation of energy, wood energy production. And when I first came to this conversation, and maybe a lot of you feel the same way, is it's sort of the development process, especially for those in academia and those in governments. The whole project development process can be a little bit of a black box. But over the last 10, 15 years or so working on projects, I've come to know a lot of projects intimately. And there is a great deal of financial risk as well as a great deal of uncertainty, not just financial uncertainty, but more broadly, around what types of technology is appropriate, around where do we get the feedstock, how should it be procured, a lot of questions that are not being answered when those questions are being asked. So if you think about sort of the last time you went to the store or the last time you went to buy a vehicle, in today's age, it's sort of expected in most cases we will have a lot of information before we make our purchase decisions. What happens is, and what has been happening in the wood world is a lot of the decisions are bypassing wood energy because that information is not readily available, because if you can imagine a school board sitting around the table and deciding what they're going to do because a boiler just blew up or the boiler is getting quite old and they're concerned that it's going to blow up on Christmas Eve, those individuals are asking questions about how they should invest their limited resources. They know very little about, or perhaps nothing about, wood energy. If they're not presenting the information in an efficient manner that can very quickly answer their questions, they're going to do what they always do, which is invest in the technology they already have. It might be propane, it might be heating oil, maybe it's natural gas if they're lucky. They have cheap prices these days, but they're not going to consider wood. The reason why we do wood, of course, for a lot of people, it's a lot of things. It's economic development, it's forest health, it's forest restoration. Depending on the part of the country you're in, there are different motivations for this. So the figure that I have up here now, the project development life cycle, is sort of the beginning of the process of educating that school board about how to think about these business investments or these investment decisions. And so the handbook and the app really addresses sort of the early stage project development. So that same school board may have access to a little bit of money to conduct some feasibility studies to narrow the range of options. If they hired somebody good, then hopefully that consultant was able to provide them with enough information to make the next steps. But they've already spent their money, perhaps, and now that information will have a difficult time going anywhere. What we're trying to do with this handbook and computer app is to expedite early stage project planning. So project scoping, community education, all of the sort of moving uncertain pieces that happen early on in a project development, to do that quickly and to do that for free. So the products that we're presenting today are freely available, and we're continuing to invest in them in a very large manner to improve upon them to make them even more accessible to a wider range of audiences. So if I continue to just walk through the app for a sec, or through the handbook for a second, then I'll describe the app. The handbook is really a primer on wood energy. And when I say wood energy, I sort of alluded to it before, it's really thermal energy that we're talking about here. So in the southern United States, as in other parts of the country, there's access to natural gas in a lot of places. And maybe it doesn't make sense to invest in wood energy where there's a cheap form of alternative fuel. But there's a lot of places where that's not the case. There's plenty of pockets. There's plenty of places that think or hope that they'll receive a natural gas line, and they probably will never see it. And they're paying exorbitant prices for propane or heating oil or some other fuel that we think is just not serving their needs the way that it could. So this handbook is a bit of a primer on what exactly does the technology entail and a little bit about how you would use it. So we walk through, if you think about sort of the National Geographic, this whole project is sort of the National Geographic meets TurboTax. The TurboTax is the app, and the National Geographic is the handbook. So easily accessible information, very high resolution, nice quality pictures and embedded videos. What I'm presenting to you here today is just on your computer screens, but this information, or the handbook, is you can download it from the Apple Store. And I'd encourage you, if you have an iPad, or right now it's an iPad form only. It'll be for Android and iOS systems at a later date, but download it and take a look at it. It's really quite stunning when you get it onto a nice platform and that you can present to people. So it walks them through information. So if you can imagine the school board, and they are beginning to contemplate this decision about wood energy. They want to know what it looks like, what the harvesting looks like in the woods, what the chipping operation, delivery, how's it going to look? Is it going to be a big silo tacked onto the back of our school? Is it a great big pit? Is it a big pile of wood chips that's going to be laying out there and blowing all over the place? They really, in most cases, have very little concept of what this will look like. If I was on my iPad, I would click one of these pictures and it would be a running video showing what it looks like. So sort of a virtual kicking the tires, if you will. And so you can imagine presenting this information in a community setting or in a client setting, helping the client understand what this looks like. We provide just a very brief overview about the different sort of tried and true technologies. So one thing that we're selling is proven technology. We're not spending much time, no time really, debating and discussing emerging technology. There's a lot of very interesting, very cool emerging technology, but the purpose for this particular volume of the handbook is to look at existing technology. So up in front of you right now is just a very simplistic diagram to help people think about, to help clients think about, well, do I have a home, or am I talking about a small campus or university campus? To begin to think about the scale of the technology and which technology is best suited for that application. About how much wood will it use? This is really just a rule of thumb. There's nothing hard about this information in terms of a lot of situations might result in something different, but just a rule of thumb to help guide the beginning conversation. We walk through some examples of cordwood, wood chips, wood pellets. Those are the three technologies we look at specifically. Of course, within those, there's a range of technologies. We provide some examples from different parts of the country. as well as different manufacturers. We're agnostic in terms of which manufacturers you should use. We're agnostic in terms of price and what you should pay, but more just to provide information to begin the conversation. We talk about where you get the information, where you get the biomass. Various factors. There's checklists throughout that will help guide users, sophisticated or even users that are just wading into this conversation for the first time, but to think about some of the characteristics that will make a project work, as well as characteristics that could very well lead to the failure of your project. So sort of our mantra is eyes wide open. We do not want to encourage wood investments that are poorly suited for the situation, that are not competitive from a financial standpoint with the available fuels that are available in the area. And we certainly don't want to invest in projects or encourage projects that don't have the community buy-in and the other factors that are necessary for success. And so we really start at that point in finding those opportunity zones, as we call them, or sweet spots, to help encourage. Within this, especially if you're thinking about that school board example again, and this is suitable for a wide range of applications. We don't really get too much into residential at this point, although in the future perhaps we will. So this is really sort of just above residential, up to maybe about 5-6 million BTUs per hour, which is sort of maybe a small campus district heating system, but certainly larger than one or two buildings, large commercial buildings. So if you think about that school board, though, they may not even know what 1 million BTUs is, or maybe they've heard of that, but it's really hard to put that in the context of what that means. And so we provide just a little bit of information trying to compare different fuels about how this is measured and why it matters. And so a really important part of heating with wood is understanding the effect of moisture content on energy content values and how you can control or at least minimize the negative impact of water in a boiler system. And so we walk people through that information. I'm going to talk here in just a very little bit about the app that you see in front of you and walk you through sort of step by step what this entails. But there's also other chapters and other information available in the handbook about how to engage the community, why you need to engage the community, and specifically what specific points do you engage the community. So we often hear it's important, but there's very little guidance usually about how do you do that. And so this information we hope to be readily accessible. I'm going to switch now to the app, but before I do that, I guess I would just pause for a second and let folks begin to queue up your questions, if you have any yet, on your web page there. As you're writing those down, if there are any questions, I'll just tell you a little bit how you access the Wood Energy Financial app. So if you're using Internet Explorer 10.0 or above, or the latest version of Firefox, or any Safari or Chrome web systems or web browsers, you should be fine. If you're the Forest Service or other federal agencies that are using Internet Explorer 8.0, and which is the current one that's for most federal agencies, this is not going to work for you on that, and so you'll need to move to Chrome or some other web browser. We've chosen not to make it accessible for those older versions just because they're going to be defunct very soon, so we don't want to waste time doing that. If there are no questions, I'll go ahead and continue. So you can access at woodenergy.umn.edu, and I will jump to that web page now. And so on the web page, you'll see different information. So you can access the handbook at the first link there. So the handbook that I was just walking through, you can download it directly from the Apple Store from that link. I'm going to go to the Wood Energy Financial app. There's also information for later, or if you want to share this with anybody, there are screenshots as well as a YouTube video. It's about a 7.5-minute video of somebody walking you through the use of the app. So let's jump to the app here. This is what we're calling the app. And when we say app, it's strictly, at this point, a computer web-based application. Gregg will talk a little bit about the build-outs and where this is going in the future. One thing, as I mentioned, is this will be designed very soon for mobile applications for iOS and Android systems. The degree that it will be available on your smartphones is something we're still working on. As we go through this, you'll see that fitting everything on a smartphone isn't always the easiest thing, but we recognize that for some people that's very important. So, but this is what the front page of the application of the app itself looks like. Well, I'll just quickly sort of orient you to this. So you have the tabs across the top. You have energy costs, capital costs, cash flow, and then there's your reporting function. These are all subject to change in our next version, but for sake of clarity, let's just consider this as what it will look like for the future. We're going to start with the energy cost tab, and I'm going to walk through a scenario. Feel free to share comments on what you think appropriate prices are. We'll walk through this. I'll stop intermittently between the tabs, ask if there's any questions of clarification or questions that you have that's bugging you. Part of this is just to solicit feedback. There's a lot of people using this around the country. We hope that there's a lot more people to use this in the future, and in order for that to be useful for folks in the South or anywhere else, we need to hear your input. So I'll walk through a scenario using some prices from the South that I obtained, and also we'll have some time towards the end of the app demonstration to look at the sensitivity of various factors to help think about, for that fictional school board, how they're considering the decision to invest in wood energy. So for arguments, let me continue to orient you for a little bit. So this is where the National Geographic in the Handbook meets TurboTax. So you probably have already seen the big yellow box up in the right-hand corner that's caught your eye. Each one of these tabs has a different sort of summation value up in the upper right-hand corner. That is sort of the take-home for that particular grouping of data inputs and outputs, and it's also subject and highly variable. It's subject to change and highly variable. I failed to mention this up front, but I have to before I forget about it. This tool should never be used for your final analysis. It should never be used for making financial investment decisions. This is a scoping tool. This is a screening tool. So let's go back to our school board. Let's say that they have a bunch of different technology questions, a bunch of different considerations. This is really meant for them to focus on those options that are most feasible, and quite frankly, to get rid of and dispense of those ideas that are wasting a lot of time and have no chance of ever financially being feasible. So it's as much about getting rid of bad projects as it is about finding good projects. Once we find good projects, and Gregg will talk about how this information then feeds into the next step, but once we find good projects, then and only then can the real feasibility begin. That's where you take the limited financial resources that a client might have and spend it on an engineer and conduct the final feasibility, obtain those procurement contracts, all that information that happens in the later half of project development in order to push that project to the finish line. So let me now provide you with a bit of an example. So we'll take that school. Let's say that they don't have access to natural gas. We can run a natural gas scenario later to show you, but I can tell you that pretty much anywhere you're competing against natural gas, it's not going to be a financially lucrative situation. It's just, at least not today, it's not. And so the way this is arrayed, you have your existing heating system on the left-hand column and your planned system, the biomass system, on the right-hand corner. So first we're going to talk about the existing heating system. We need to know something about what you have in place. This scenario I'm presenting is for retrofitting an existing facility. You can use this for new facility construction as well. Let's say that we have a propane heating system, and Let's say that your heating prices are somewhere around $2 a gallon. That's what you were able to lock in for this upcoming heating season. So you type that information in there. You can also see, let me make it a little bit more clear on here, see if you can see it. It's cutting off the screen a little bit, but down at the bottom there is also a slider. And so this is what you can use to sort of dial in information or to take a look at the sensitivity of a given factor, the given inputs, such as the cost of your existing fuel. So then you have information about the cost per BTU, conversion rates, some general output information that might be useful to some users. In the next set of inputs down below that I'm circling with my cursor is your annual fuel usage. And so a good way to do this is to look out over the past 3 years, 5 years is even better. You sort of want to get an average annual is what you're looking for. You can use any one of these three inputs. I tend to prefer to use gallons since that's how it arrives and how it's denoted on your fuel bill. Let's say that you have about a 200,000 gallon propane usage. You'll get that information, as I said, from your previous year's heating bills or your fuel delivery receipts. But when I change that, you can see that total BTUs per annum as well as total cost also changes. So you can change any one of those. I have one question. Can this be integrated with solar, wind, and geothermal? Not directly. It cannot. There's ways that we can incorporate or sort of game the app to show benefits of that. And I guess if you're asking the question, is the financial analysis, can it be combined with those? Not directly. Can a wood heating system technically be combined with solar, wind, and geothermal? Absolutely. The devil's in the details, but that's certainly an option. We can come back to that if you'd like. So let's continue to outline our existing boilers, so our existing fuel system. So we're going to say we have a conventional system, operates of an efficiency of about 80%. If you're changing out an old boiler, maybe it doesn't operate that efficiently, but just for argument's sake today, we're going to leave it at that. The next set of inputs is then starting to conceptualize what the new system will look like. In a wood heating system, unless you're doing industrial process heat, very rarely will you ever want to have the wood boiler cover 100% of your heating needs. So in a cold place like Minnesota, where I live, on that coldest day in the winter, where it hits that peak demand, you're going to hit that peak demand with the wood boiler in combination with your peaking boiler or your backup boiler. You also want redundancy in these systems. And so we always think about sort of a substitution percentage when it comes to wood energy heating. For the range of projects I'm talking about, from 1 to about 6 million BTU, anywhere from 80 to 90%, even 70% in some cases, depending on how much hot water thermal storage you have, would be an appropriate number. Let's say that it's 85%. If you're following along on your computer and you have another screen open, you're more than welcome to dial in your own numbers. And you're also welcome to type into the box if you want me to try other numbers in here. But let's just run through a scenario first and see where it lands us. Right now, the way the app works is I'm moving over to the right-hand side, is that it's for chips or pellets. We're adding cordwood right now, so by next month we hope to have cordwood functionality as well as cordwood pricing to this. So let's say that we're doing wood pellets, delivered wood pellets to this school, this hypothetical school. So I enter that information. It gives me an efficiency, sort of a theoretical efficiency of that boiler. Different boilers, different manufacturers will have different efficiencies. That efficiency also is a function of moisture content. So if I was to type in wood chips and I receive them at 30% wet moisture content, that's going to be one efficiency. If they truly come in at 50% wet moisture content, then the efficiency is much less. Just like a fireplace, you throw wet wood into a fireplace, it doesn't burn as hot. Creates a lot of smoke, it creates a lot of problems. And so it's the same thing in any of these boilers. That's where the moisture content becomes a problem. But let's just say that actually I think I have prices for wood chips and pellets for the South. We'll just do the pellets for now. Let's, and then down below here again, you can see sort of where you enter the price. You can enter it on a dollar per BTU basis, a green ton basis, or a dry ton basis. Wood pellets, of course, are mostly dry, so it's not going to be much of a difference here. Let's say that we receive a delivered price of wood pellets at I don't know. I want to put in $160 a green ton. Somebody type in a different number if you believe it to be different. In the northern half of the U.S., where I live, delivered pellets within about 75 miles is going to run you probably closer to about $185 a ton up here. But I know they're a lot less in the south.
Dr. Becker, I have a question. Would that include transportation costs as well? Is that like the delivered price?
That's an important question. That's an important question. So the way that we deal with it here is you tell us what you think the price is delivered. That way we're not getting into any complicated questions about, well, I get some of my material from 75 miles away at this price. I get some of it from 25 miles away at that price. The user just simply enters in an average annual price, or an average unit price, sorry. And so it does incorporate delivery to the extent that you incorporate it.
Thank you.
Now the information below then is just general outputs, so green tons, dry tons, truckloads, as well as your annual fuel costs. So in the upper right-hand corner, in this particular scenario, we have about $190,000 in annual fuel costs. That's at today's prices. Now, an important question that will have to be asked and we'll come back to, and so just sort of keep it in the back of your mind is, well, that's today's price, but what's the price going to look like in 20 years from now? Because we're really building a system for the next 20 years or so, and so when we look at financial returns, we can't look at just today's price. There needs to be an escalation of some sort calculated in there. So we're going to come back to that, and that's important. Are there any other questions before I move on to the second tab, dealing with capital costs? I'm going to start moving a little bit faster now.
You're fine. And Dr. Becker, I'll ask the questions if you want to just keep moving forward, and we'll do that. And they can always save them for the Q&A towards the end as well.
Okay, so I moved into the next tab, the capital costs. And I think what's really unique about what we've done here, this isn't the only estimator like this that exists out there, but we believe this one is the most dynamic and robust, in that we have about 250 known projects in the United States that are wood pellets, chips, and then soon we're going to be adding a whole bunch more for cordwood. Of those 250-some projects, we're relatively confident in the numbers we have for about 160, 170 projects. So of those projects, we were able to calculate on a size basis or predict based on those equations what the average price has been for, say, a 2.5 million BTU per hour boiler of the pellet fuel type. And so depending on your scenario, depending on the size of the boiler, the model here will generate a cost function, or a cost variable. That cost variable first, though, needs to be manipulated here just real quickly. We have to first decide and determine exactly how big the boiler is. That's a very important question. So we know how many gallons of propane was used last year. Now we need to know a little bit about what the heating season looks like. So right now I have in here a heating season of 6.5 months. That's a Minnesota heating season. The rest of you all in the South are probably laughing at us thinking, why would you ever live there? Our heating season is much shorter. And so if you dial that heating season down, let's just say you have 4, which is probably even a little bit on the high side, but and Gregg will talk a little bit about sort of future build out of this will be much more sophisticated using heating degree days to size the boiler. But let's just say you come in at about 4.7. My cursor right now is pointing at the estimated size of the boiler with the information given. Our model is assuming that to be about $1 million boiler. Now, what does that include? That includes the boiler, that includes engineering. but there might also be a lot of other factors that it doesn't include. For instance, maybe your building needs hot water conversion or other site acquisition costs. You can enter that information in here. Or maybe you think that our numbers are just not relevant for your situation, or you have better numbers. You can put your own numbers in there and just see what the cost of that is. So let's drop it down to $750,000. Over on the right-hand column, there's building hookups. There's if you have a district heating system or if you have to lay any pipe. Right now I have 60 linear feet at $175 a foot. Those are all costs that are incorporated, that you need to incorporate into your analysis. So total capital costs approximately $760,000 under this particular scenario. So now we know what the annual fuel cost savings are, $190,000. We know what the total capital costs are, $761,000. We're going to use that annual fuel cost savings to basically pay off that capital investment. And this is then what the result looks like. So the final tab walks you through some very basic financial analysis, given some parameters that I've preloaded here: 3% interest, 20-year lifespan, no outside money. These systems are quite efficient, especially pellet systems, very low maintenance cost. All of that, you're looking at a simple payback of about 4 years under this scenario. So now jump back to your school board really quickly. They just went from not only knowing a little bit about wood energy and starting to think about which technology is most appropriate for them, but they've very quickly done some sophisticated arm waving and said, you know what, maybe this is something that we need to look into a lot more closely because the payback is really quite good. I'm going to stop there. I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions on the app before we jump back, and then Greg's going to present a little bit.
Yeah, Dr. Becker, you did have a question previously, and I guess it's related to transportation and the supply chain and transporting the wood. Do you think there's a threat for spreading diseases around or insects such as like Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer?
It depends on how far you're moving. Yeah, so we have emerald ash borer EAB here in Minnesota. It really is location to location. It depends on how big your quarantine region is. If you're delivering within a quarantine region, then you shouldn't have a problem. If you're burning it in these systems, of course, that gets rid of it. But yeah, you need to be concerned about moving wood around, so just follow those local guidelines.
Yeah, and I'm figuring that most of the distance will probably not be over 50 miles anyways. And then if you're receiving pellets, that's from a mill. That's probably using sawdust primarily.
Yeah, it depends on, for instance, we have gypsy longhorn, or gypsy moth, sorry, and we've received an exemption within the state that within even sawmill transported material, but certainly pellets, that the survival rate is quite low through those processes. They're not really a vector of problem. And so, again, it just depends on what the local authorities say about it.
I have one more question. Is there a relationship with the building size, for instance, the square footage on this financial app?
Not on the app itself. It's an important question. It's not necessary to make a basic or preliminary estimation of your boiler size. I mean, it becomes a really important factor when we calculate a building heat load. And about building heat load is what an engineer will use to, that's your R factor, your windows, your doors, all that square footage. That's what hopefully an engineer will be using to calculate heat load for the final boiler determination. For the app, for our purposes here, for sort of a once-over or a quick pass-over, that information isn't as relevant. All right, so I'm going to move on to, or move back to the other information. Please keep your questions coming, and we'll come back to them at the very end. Greg, it's all you.
Let me introduce Greg real fast. Sorry. We're fortunate to have Gregg Mast with us. He's founder and president and CEO of EarthTech Energy Incorporated. This is a Minneapolis-based consulting firm that specializes in biomass energy development. So he's pretty much in the consulting for the private sector technology, works with project developers, municipal utilities, colleges, universities, and government agencies. He has over 10 years of professional experience in biomass project development, feedstock resource analysis, feasibility and financial analysis, as well as fuel risk management in the sector areas of biomass-based thermal, combined heat and power, also advanced biofuels and renewable chemicals. So he's got a lot of great skill set here: economic, marketing, financial, environmental. Obviously, he's on today's webinar. He's, I think, greatly qualified along with Dr. Becker, especially in creating such a robust financial app. I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to Gregg so he can dig into his presentation here, and that way we can have more time for questions at the end. So, Gregg, the floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Helene, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today for the webinar. Well, it certainly looks and feels like fall here in Minnesota this afternoon, so it's a good time to be discussing wood energy and heating with wood as we are starting preparations for the heating season here in the upper Midwest. As Helene had mentioned, my firm is a specialty consulting business where we serve the bioenergy sector and work with all kinds of clients as they seek to develop and implement cost-effective and sustainable bioenergy solutions. And as a member of the team, working in collaboration with Dr. Becker, along with the Forest Service and the Southern Regional Extension Forestry, I've had the opportunity over the past few months to reach out to a number of stakeholders in the wood energy sector to share with them more about the wood energy financial app and also solicit some of their insights and feedback as it relates to the existing app itself. As we anticipate and prepare for the future iterations of the app, it's really important for us to hear what folks think about the app, its usability, practicality, and what type of improvements and enhancements users would like to see regarding the app that can be potentially incorporated into future versions to ensure that the app remains useful and is meeting the needs of various stakeholders like yourselves to better support the further development and growth of the wood heating sector. So I just wanted to provide a sampling of some of the feedback that we've received thus far in speaking with different users throughout the country, just to share with you and give you a flavor for some of those features and the items that folks would like to see as we continue to make improvements and enhancements to the app. And as Dr. Becker had walked you through a scenario earlier on, certainly please take a moment to, in the chat window, provide us some of your initial thoughts and feedback and some of the things that perhaps you have some questions on or different features that you think would be useful to consider for future iterations of the app. But as you can see on the slide, here's just a few of the different bullets that we've been hearing kind of collectively as some general themes from different folks. And as Dr. Becker had mentioned, the cordwood will be made available as a feature in the app very shortly, in addition to the existing wood chip and wood pellet options for the fuel type. And also, I do think that I'd just like to point out, certainly continuing to work and increase some of the transparency and enhance some of the descriptions, and then provide you some background on, further background on the assumptions and some of the calculations that are made within the app. I think that's always useful and helpful as you prepare to utilize this information and the outputs and take that to the various groups and decision makers that you're working with as well. Also, a lot of the feedback has been centered around making sure to keep the financial app simple and intuitive. I think a lot of users like the fact that it's very straightforward and yet it's being comprehensive but not overwhelming. And so that's been nice to hear. And also we're continuing to look at how can we improve the appearance of the app and also ensure that the app is portable across various platforms. Certainly will be a point of emphasis as we move forward. And obviously, opportunities like this to expand some of our outreach and increase some awareness to the financial app and provide some in-depth training on its use is certainly something that we also plan to continue to provide in the future. So in preparing for this afternoon's webinar too, I thought it'd be useful to share with all of you some of the analysis that we've conducted to give you a bit of a peek into perhaps the broader opportunities for biomass heat and the potential incorporation of the app into your work to more rapidly assess potential viability for wood heat in your state and region. And so using data from the U.S. Census Bureau, this first slide here shows in the United States by a breakdown of the occupied housing units by fuel type, which the units are noted in thousands of units. What you can see is that the majority of housing units across the country are heated primarily by natural gas, followed by electricity. And when comparing fairly recent history, using 2010 to 2013 data, natural gas growth was fairly flat, while heating and electricity saw 7% growth during that time period. Fuel oil and propane each had some declining growth, but still served over 12 million households nationwide as a primary heating source. So when you take a look at wood heat, I think that you'll see the modest growth of almost 4%, providing nearly 2.5 million homes, or just over the equivalent of 2%, as the primary heating source in the country. And when you add together the homes using the traditionally more expensive fuel sources, as Dr. Becker had pointed out, like electricity, fuel oil, and propane in the U.S., you see a total of over 55 million homes utilizing those sources for primary heating. And this would seem to represent a significant opportunity for wood heat. And extrapolating some of these housing unit numbers to, again, some of these smaller commercial opportunities, public buildings, campuses, where you can string together and look at rapidly assessing the opportunities for small district heating perhaps. It's certainly one of the ways that the financial app can be very valuable in helping conduct that preliminary investigation. So this next slide, I had anticipated having several colleagues on today's webinar from the southern region, and thought it'd be fun to take a look at the profiles for just a few of the states and various parts of the region as well. So this slide looks at the state of Georgia. And here the story is certainly all about electricity and natural gas serving as the primary heating sources, with over 3 million units, or 93% of homes being served between the two. And when looking at electricity, fuel oil, and propane in Georgia, over 2 million homes are served, which would indicate an interesting possibility in converting a portion of those units to wood heat, which currently in 2013 was the primary heating source for over 37,000 homes in Georgia, or representing 1% of the total housing units. But wood heat did show double-digit growth from 2010 to 2013 of nearly 11%. If we take a quick look at North Carolina, the story is fairly similar. As this slide depicts, electricity and natural gas are again the dominant heating sources for homes, representing about 86% combined. With electricity, you see growth of over 8% from 2010 to 2013, while serving 2.3 million homes. When you aggregate that electricity, fuel oil, and propane opportunity space together, you can see over 2.7 million units using the 2013 numbers are served by these sources, while wood heat provides 84,000 homes with heat, or the equivalent of just over 2% of the total housing units, and also had 9% growth from 2010 to 2013. Which is interesting to note that it's over double that of that U.S. growth in wood heat that I'd shown in the previous slide over that.
I have a question for you, Greg. When you have the units there and you say households, are they actually having a wood-burning stove in their house, or are they? Does it count if, say, a biomass power plant's providing that household with electricity? Like, how exactly does this chart work when you describe the wood? aspect?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a primary appliance or heating source itself, Helene, and so I don't necessarily think that they are breaking that out to where you see the electricity source, where that electricity or how that electricity is being generated by what type of fuel for the home. So it is going to be predominantly the type of heating device that you have in your home itself or your housing unit.
It may be interesting to kind of see maybe in the future exactly maybe percentage of that electricity, what sources it's coming from. I guess that could be something later on down the road, but I'm going to stop there.
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. So we'll just quickly look at Texas here as well, the same type of analysis, and just displaying again that primary heating fuel type of electricity and natural gas, which serve around 8.7 million housing units, or a combined 96% of the homes in the state. Electricity grew 8% between 2010 and 2013, while the total number of housing units using electricity, fuel oil, and propane, that totaled over 5.6 million units. And when you look at wood heat in Texas, currently using that 2013 data, 39,000 homes, or less than 1% of housing units were utilizing wood as their primary heating fuel. And you can also see that growth in wood from 2010 to 2013 has declined by 5%. So this last slide, looking at kind of the occupied housing units, again breaking out by heating fuel type. I just wanted to share with you just an aggregation and share some of the data tables behind kind of the percent of total housing units using the United States on that top row, and then Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. You can see that generally speaking of just the three states that I utilize or use as the example, natural gas in those states is below kind of the U.S. Percentage, and then also for electricity it is substantially higher. LP, propane, it's about the same as the average in the U.S., and then also looking at the fuel oil, again, it's actually a little bit lower in Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. The wood heat, approximately the same as what you're seeing broadly across the U.S. Just wanted to share that with you as well as just another look at the data. So just the last couple of slides that I prepared today too, I just wanted to spend a few minutes and just to give you a heads up and familiarize you with the Forest Service, the USDA, the funding of 16 now statewide wood energy teams in fiscal years 2013 and 2014. The program was initially piloted back in 2012 in the state of Oregon. And so the link there on the bottom part of the slide, that will take you to the Forest Service where they describe a little bit more about the awards, the grant awards that have been provided to each of the states. But on the next slide, as these 16 states are really collaborating within the states through various sectors, including folks from the private sector, agencies, government, academia, and then also nonprofits and NGOs. The general themes that we've seen as we've been talking with all the statewide leads for these projects, in addition to getting some of their feedback on how they're utilizing the Wood Energy financial app and their day-to-day work, it really is around focusing on how do we continue to promote the viability and utilization of woody biomass for heating and also for combined heat and power applications. These teams are focused on working and supporting interested stakeholders throughout that project development life cycle. And so I think the Wood Energy financial app is another useful tool to have in the toolbox that the state teams will be becoming even more familiar with. And so you, if you're a project developer, working with a potential project owner, building owner, facility, that's certainly a tool that I think that will be beneficial, which speaks a common language across various groups to look at rapidly assessing how those economics look on the very front end and early stage. And obviously, each of the teams are very interested in looking at how do we continue to target areas where we can displace fossil-based heating systems, again, with that opportunity space of predominantly fuel oil, propane, and then also in a few of the states, coal and natural gas, where it can be economical. And where are those opportunities to utilize cordwood, chips, and pellet systems across a range of different sizes and building types. And again, just wanted to emphasize the collaboration of these working groups, not only within their states, but then also across state lines, across regions, and throughout the country, and how we can work together to continue to support the development and the growth of the woody biomass value chain. So in these conversations and receiving some of this feedback and soliciting advice on what's working well with the financial app, but then also looking at the different types of innovative approaches that the various statewide wood teams are taking to support wood energy development, our team is also planning to aggregate a lot of those best practices, continue to more broadly disseminate with our project partners throughout the southern region of the U.S., really to accelerate that growth, and also with the hopes of jump-starting action while also avoiding some potential pitfalls that oftentimes come up in wood energy projects and heating projects. So with that, I definitely want to leave a few minutes for questions from our audience, and I would just like to also especially thank Helene for her patience and her hard work in helping coordinate and set up and moderate today's webinar. So thank you, Helene. I appreciate everything that you've
Thank you, Greg and Dennis, for providing this presentation. I've actually, I've seen the PowerPoint, I've looked through it, but I actually learned so much more just from listening in on what you had to say today. There is a question out there. So I guess we're just referring to woody biomass, but could you use this app for other forms of biomass per se, like like poultry litter, or I guess other forms out there? Maybe if you knew the BTU value, I don't know if there's a way to maybe make that work, but that's one of the questions out there.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Currently the app is not set up for those other forms of biomass. It's conceivably it could be done. I don't think it would even be terribly difficult to incorporate, as long as we knew the heat rates for those different forms of fuel. But that's part of the broader conversation. Greg didn't mention, but it's worth mentioning, that the Biomass Thermal Energy Council, BTEC, will be taking over ownership of this app next year. And the conversations such as which fuels should this cover will be front and center in that future build-up.
Okay, great. Looking for more questions here. If anyone has one last question, please type it in real fast. If not, please feel free to email our presenters today. They're more than happy to answer any questions you have, and they'd really appreciate some feedback on, what you thought of this app, especially if you're from the Southeast. They would really like to hear some feedback from the applications, maybe what they should look into further. So with that, I'm going to close and thank everyone for participating. A recording of this webinar will be available on the Forestry Webinars Bioenergy Webinar Portal page. And also, I do have an upcoming webinar next month, and this is going to be on an introduction to Open LCA, which is the Lifecycle analysis, and what the work that United States Department of Agriculture is doing, the data they're gathering for the LCA, and how you're able to fit this into this open software, which is free, to come up with a quick estimate on an LCA value for your projects in the future, and this would be for more biofuel related projects. If you are waiting to receive your continuing education credits, I'm going to, in the chat window there, if you click on that link, that will send you to the exit survey, and I'm also going to push it out to everyone. But then, once again, thank you, Dennis and Greg, and the audience for participating, and all the questions that were addressed. So with that, we're going to close, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.